So I would like to bring this conversation to a temporary close by posing a hypothesis.
Please.
Here's my hypothesis. We see two parts of it are actually real. The third is a hypothesis, the third component. We see, especially this year, that the runaway negative impacts of climate change are on an exponential curve because they are driven not by yearly emissions, but by the concentration. So the effect is cumulative, the concentration of gases in the atmosphere. Hence, the impact on the cryosphere, on land, on oceans, on everyone, on forests is on an exponential curve. And we're witnessing that. Do we agree on that?
Oh, yes.
Okay. We have one exponential curve of the negative consequences. We have another exponential curve that we are beginning to see that is not quite as evident because bad news sells better than good news. But if good news sold at least as well as bad news, we would all be much more aware of this other exponential curve that is the technology exponential curve, where we now have that solar is cheaper in 96% of all geographies than coal, oil, and gas. Wind coming up the same. Batteries, just price of batteries has gone down 80% in the past 10 years. Electric vehicles, all of these technologies, wind, solar, batteries, and electric vehicles, all of which seek to reduce the emissions from the economy that we have right now, are on an exponential curve. So let's call that at the exponential curve of technology. All very well and good. We have to continue to invest in those and other technologies. But now we have been talking today about a third aspect of this that should also be on an exponential curve. And my hypothesis is maybe it is. Maybe the third exponential curve is the growing realization that we humans are having that in fact, lo and behold, we're not separate from nature, which is where we started these conversations several sessions ago. That in fact, we're not separate from nature, we're not separate from each other, we're not separate from myself, that all of this is interconnected, and that in the realization of that lies the seed of innovation, human nature. It lies the field of opportunity to not just fix climate as though that were the only thing that we should be doing. It is huge, and I've devoted my life to it, but it is not everything that we have to do. Honestly, right underneath all of that, as we've been discussing, is this is the opportunity. That's why I call climate is the gym in which we go to strengthen this muscle. And I don't know how it is for you, or maybe it's just because we operate in our own little bubbles, but it does seem to me that there is an exponential curve of attention to these issues, which for me is the software. It's not the hardware. The hardware is often going great, but the software, which is where we do get the long-term effects, where we do answer chronic emergency, not just the immediate emergency, not just the acute, where we actually can come back to ourselves and understand that we have an ancestral, long ancestral habit energy, habit mode of thinking, habit mode of being that would tell us that we are separate from nature, from ourselves, and from each other, which is fundamentally, as you have pointed out, as science points out, not the case. So the fact is that science and many spiritual paths and many indigenous views agree on the fact that we are intricately and indivisibly related. And in as much as we can be intentional about that, that's the difference, right? The technology exponential curve is occurring because there is intention behind it. It doesn't just occur. And the human nature exponential curve of understanding how we do have what it takes to face this and much more has to be intentional. We can't just react to an earthquake and go and save my neighbor and then go back to my previous modus operandi, right? We have to be intentional and consistent. Yeah. And in as much as we are intentional and consistent about it, we do change our way of thinking, our way of being, and our way of impacting the world. But it is about intentionality. It is about the discipline of choice, the discipline of practice. It is not about just, one day yes and one day no. And that's the difficulty, because that discipline is the one that that is hard to elicit. And that's where your beauty, joy, and what was it?
Abundance.
Beauty, joy, and abundance is the food for that intentionality, right? That's the food that keeps us going and that feeds then the consistency that we need. Because if we're only focusing on the negative, we're never going to get there. But if we feed it with constant daily recognition of beauty, joy, and abundance, which is there, all we need to do is look for it and express it, then we have an exponential curve that meets the others. So that's my little exponential curve hypothesis.
Well, thank you.
I agree with it completely. And I think it's incredibly exciting to see a level of public engagement with climate in the last couple of years. It's so different than where we were 5 and 10 years ago. The media covering it in a way they were not 5 years ago, et cetera. But, that is not the end of the road, but it's a better place than where we were not long ago.
It's the beginning of a different road.
Yes.
Recently I was I was in Dharamsala's wonderful conference with young people from around the world, young compassionate leaders. And the organizers asked the participants, these wonderful young people, to craft one question for His Holiness. And actually the questions were fairly consistent. So young people from Afghanistan, Lebanon, the Americas, South, Central, and North, Europe, and so on. And there was a consistency, which was, I am experiencing helplessness and futility. How do I get over it? And it was, these were all these remarkable, brave, very articulate, precious people. It was so wonderful being with them. And His Holiness had a consistent response throughout. The cure for futility is care and altruism, compassion. And in my own work in this field of compassion, developing this heuristic map of compassion, and then really going into the neuroscience and social psychology, recognizing, looking at the science, not just philosophical and religious texts per se, or collecting the amazing anecdotes from the kind of people you were talking to, Rebecca. It's fascinating because what I learned from the science is very positive, which is, those who receive compassion benefit. Actually, those who give compassion are compassionate. There's all kinds of interesting neurochemical responses, including the enhancement of our immune system for those who are compassionate. And those who witness compassion are morally uplifted, and they want to be compassionate. So it's like a quadruple win in a certain way that I think is really kind of why wisdom and compassion in Buddhism is looked on as really two sides of the same coin. if you have this kind of awakening to, seeing reality clearly, you will want to, when you encounter suffering, to benefit others because you're not separate from that, and so on. So, this comes back to a short conversation we had some months ago around awe, and what Dacher Keltner in the chapter in his book on moral beauty, and that being a good person is not just, it's not like a duty, as you were saying, and as you're also suggesting, that there is a kind of moral beauty that arises that really affects your fundamental character. And I think we're, again, looking at these two paths. One is talking about, the chronicity of the climate issues, and that, it's so easy to fall asleep, so to speak. Though I have to say this summer it was hard to sleep at all in the heat. But in any case, I use this as a terrible metaphor, but, if you only get your teeth taken care of by a dental hygienist once every 6 months and you don't bother in the meantime.
You mean like brushing them, for example?
Every single day. If you only do it, you go to your hygienist says, oh my goodness, what happened here? That it is the commodification of the self, how we have been colonized in a certain way by the corporate world to consume and extract. Everything around us is telling us to do the wrong, not everything, but lots of things around telling us to do the harmful thing, the wrong thing. And they're saying, this is what will make us happy. And it is a decommodification of the self and the deconstruction of the self that happens within the context of practice for some. I won't say all, but for some. And it's that daily process. And I often cite this, that, His Holiness gets up at 3 a.m. every morning, and Thai's practice was completely embedded throughout the fabric of his entire life, every aspect. Even stopping at a red light or the telephone ringing, so to speak, using these everyday analogies, is to really understand that practice is not separate from this moment as it is. And the climate crisis, it's another kind of inflection on chronicity. Awakening it's an ongoing process. And the only way I feel that we can address what we're in right now is what you're suggesting, is to be very intentional, to stay, clear about, what your values are, and to correct course in a way that is non-violent when you go off course, which we do all the time. And that's the power of practice, because you're attending to what is arising in the present moment, including your own delusions. And I remember years ago when I was first practicing with Thich Nhat Hanh, he would talk about the life of the Buddha and Mara, the sort of devil death showing up. Well, Mara is really a state of mind. And instead of rejecting Mara just outright or ignoring Mara outright, Thai made this wonderful kind of invitation. Well, hello, Mara, I know you. It's like having this kind of transparency to one's own delusions. Say, oh, I get it. And also living in the context of community where there's feedback, sometimes abrupt, too straightforward, where you are saying, wow, you're in a trap right now. That we call it in Zen being tied up without a rope, of your own construction. And it's causing harm. So again, coming back to care, connection, and community, these sort of three dimensions which are interconnected, and the value of practice, and also of living by vow, having vows or making commitments and promises to stay, within the sort of values that feed the sense of moral beauty. And I think that invitation is up for many right now, even in the discussions that are happening publicly around artificial intelligence and machine learning. To what end is this? To what benefit? Who will be affected in the immediate sense or downstream? And these are the same issues that we're addressing here as we touch into the climate. Is what are our values? How does our view of reality feed into those values? And those values, promote or conduce to behaviors that are either healing or harming. To recognize the burdens and the benefits of how we're living, and to be intentional about shifting toward the benefits and away from the burdens, coming down to this issue of the commodification and reification of the self, which is like this sort of major toxin that all of us are subject to greater or lesser degrees, but practice is about addressing that toxin and transforming it.